Okay, this is a very good question, and one that I think is relevant for many parents who have para support for their kids, but yet their least restrictive environment isn't optimal with regards to their exposure, their involvement in the general education setting. And so I think this is a relevant a question, and trying to analyze that and trying to understand that balance better. Okay, so you have an IEP meeting coming up in 2 weeks. Your kindergartner who needs a good bit of help, he has 70% of his day in the resource room minimum, but it's five or take rest in his homeroom classroom where he has para support. Now you got a phone call regarding setting up an IEP saying that they needed to schedule it. No changes are being made to the IEP itself, but the wording will be different, regarding the para support. So quite frankly, that's a big change to the IEP. Is wording changes, but they wouldn't go into the wording changes. But at the same time, they would need to justify, well, let me finish this. They want to back her off some and only have her during transitional periods. He has ASD and ADHD, and this and has to have someone guide him during his work. He, as a teacher, reads aloud in the classroom. Para guides him. Without constant guidance, he falls behind, won't work at all. How can I fight this? What do I do exactly? You're in Alabama. You're not prepared for this and whatsoever. He does need independence because he is a creature of habit. He's eating lunch with the para and not wanting peer interaction, so I agree on that front, but I don't think they need to take her from him in the classroom. Okay, the one thing that you need to start with is that he spends the majority of his day more than more than 50%, more than 60%, according to what you wrote. He's spending 70% at a minimum in the self-contained environment, or, you're calling it the resource room, but anything. If he's spending less than 40% of his day in a general education classroom, that's considered a self-contained environment. So that means he's not in a general education kindergarten. And, that's troubling to me first and foremost, because when a child enters kindergarten, there should be a presumption that the child can be or spend the majority of their day in a general education kindergarten class. That should be the presumption. Competence should be the presumption. And then based upon that, the IEP team sort of makes an analysis as the school year progresses with regards to academic need and support, behavioral need and support, those kind of things. But where it gets extremely tricky and maddening on my part as a special education attorney is when a school system starts from the viewpoint of this child can't be in a general education kindergarten class, so therefore, and they sort of make that assumption. And some of them do it all dressed up in nice language, like, oh, we're going to do something called reverse inclusion, and reverse inclusion doesn't exist. And, as far as the law is concerned, to where, and I see this a lot in preschool determinations as well, we just don't know how they're going to function in the class. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with a more restrictive setting, and then like dipping your toe in the water to see, what it's like before you sit there and take a leap. But the problem is that once you make the determination of where the child's going to be, it's very, very, very uncommon for a school to actually move forward with that reverse inclusion, to where they sit there and they, like the good ship Lollipop, with all their good intention of one more day in there and a few more hours in there. The presumption, like I said, with regards to least restrictive environment should be that's where the child starts, and then through data collection makes a determination of what services need to be pushed in, which include Aide support. There are some schools that I don't know where they get this information from. It's laughable that somehow giving a child a para inside of a general education classroom, they consider more restrictive than pulling them out of that optimal environment of general education and giving them more services outside of general education. Now, this is more restrictive. Pushing services and supports into a general education classroom is least restrictive when you do the comparison. Now, pushing aide support in, is it more restrictive than not having an aide? Yes, of course. But you see how that goes. The optimal environment is general education, then you push in services, and then if the push in of services isn't working, then you start pulling out of that environment and start providing additional specialized instruction outside of general education. And then you're working upon that continuum of alternative placements, which is what least restrictive environment is. But you have to sort of presume that competence is there, especially for a kindergartner, unless it's just glaringly obvious. But if the school doesn't have the data collection to absolutely support that, then they're running the risk of getting themselves in a little bit of trouble for not exhausting, pushing in services, and then sort of confining a child to a self-contained environment. So you start there. That's my number one concern, because you're asking your question here. We are knocking on the door of, we're in February, beginning of February. So how long has he been in that environment? And then with the little amount of time that he's allowed in general education, he has para support. And then he eats his lunch with paras. That isn't your son's fault. That is absolutely the fault of staff and how they're managing and scheduling his time. And they're not using all the opportunities to create goals and envelop him with services. Let's say speech language path identifies time during his day to interact with him and peers at lunch, which can be done, which should be done. This is how we increase your child's skills in these areas. It is also how we reduce potential behavior or distractibility or inattention. They have to work in tandem with each other. But if your child has ADHD and ASD, then at that point, you should have the involvement of a board-certified behavior analyst as part of the team. Now, whether your child has negative behaviors or not, your child obviously has high rates of distractibility to where there needs to be somebody there redirecting and participating in the delivery of the academics. All right, that's a benefit. But at the same time, I don't know what kind of data collection they would be relying upon to sit there and say, oh, he's doing so well with the 30% of the time that we're allowing him into general education. Wrong. The data collection should be based upon he's doing good with the para support. Let's increase his time in general education for the academics with the para support. And when he's there, the majority of his day and the LRE is flipped from, let's say, a 0-4, which is self-contained, to, let's say, outside of that 40% range, to where your child's, let's say, 50-50, which is what they call a 0-3 LRE designation. And at that point, bravo, we're progressing. We're moving along that continuum more in general education and an expansion of the day. But the para support should be there. Them saying, oh, he's progressed to where he doesn't need the para support, then why the hell aren't you increasing his time in general education? Then at that point, you see, you would sit there and the justification would be to maintain that para support while you're increasing that time. And then with regards to dealing with this dependence of eating with the para, that is not your son's fault. That is poor management of your son's time. And they should be maximizing this time in interaction with peers by designing opportunities for socialization. But like I said, there needs to be, in my viewpoint, a board-certified behavior analyst involved in your program to conduct a series of observations to understand where the distractibility is, where the need for redirection. If there are negative behaviors, let's say refusals, things of that nature, things that may violate the student code of conduct, then at that point, those things need to be addressed within the IEP itself, and you move from there toward progress. And that progress for a child that spends most of their day in special education progress is defined as less time in that special education environment and expanding the time in general education. You don't sit there and send a child to general education for small snippets of time and then pat yourself on the back and say, well, it's time to get rid of the para. No, it's time to expand his day. Para shouldn't go anywhere until they have the data collection to support that he's maximized his time in general education, but then requires this set of time inside special education to receive additional services. Okay? Now, if you have any additional concerns or you need additional explanation, then do me a favor, just tag me and let me know. And, I'll be more than happy. You're in Alabama. You're in one of the states where we serve families, and I'll be more than happy to provide you more of an individualized approach going into your meeting. Okay?